Kevin Rayner's teaching right through there, and I tried to get him just to open those doors and we'd turn our chairs around. Then I could listen to him. But he wouldn't do it. Joshua 23. You know, throughout history, there have been a lot of farewell speeches. Lots by presidents, I guess almost every president. I even found a farewell speech by Oprah Winfrey when she decided to quit her TV show. All kind of sports figures. And according to the historians I read about this week, the most famous presidential farewell speech was that one by George Washington, where he warned us to be leery of any political parties. I'd say he probably nailed that one. And then 1939, I think it was, Yankee Stadium, where 61,808 people were in attendance and witnessed Lou Gehrig's farewell speech, where he said, "Today I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth." Joshua 23 begins Joshua's farewell speech. Did I get that year right, Bill? Were you there? Okay.
Close. That's my birthday.
Somewhere in the 30s. Anyway, Joshua 23 begins his farewell speech, and it goes on over into the next chapter. And his farewell speech is much like many of God's leaders before him. Jacob, Genesis 49:1 starts like this. Jacob called to his sons and said, "Gather yourselves together that I may tell you that which will happen to you in the days to come. Assemble yourselves and hear, you sons of Jacob. Listen to Israel, your father." And then later, Joseph's farewell speech starts like this in Genesis 50. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am dying, but God will surely visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, "God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here." And we'll find out that later it did happen. Moses' farewell speech, Deuteronomy 31. Moses went and spoke these words to all Israel. He said to them, "I'm 120 years old today. I can no more go out and come in. Yahweh has said to me, you shall not go over this Jordan. Yahweh, your God himself, will go over before you. He will destroy these nations from before you, and you shall dispossess them. Joshua will go over before you as Yahweh has spoken." And now we come to Joshua's. Those farewell speeches, they were pretty well just telling the people what's going to happen. Joshua's farewell address is primarily an appeal for Israel to remain faithful to God. His speech lays out for the Israelites what has happened as he reviews what's happened and what will happen if you do right, and what will happen if you don't remain faithful. He points out that God keeps his promises, all of them, the good ones and the not so good ones. The ones that are blessings, if you choose to remain faithful and don't compromise yourself with the people around you. You don't worship other gods, but God also keeps his promises concerning their destruction when you fail to stay loyal to him and only Yahweh. Well, our study over the past couple of months has reminded us that Joshua has been through a lot. His name was originally Hoshea, which means salvation. But Moses changed his name to Joshua, which means Yahweh saves, or God saves. And so he shared the same name as Jesus. Yeshua in Hebrew, which comes over transliterated in English as Joshua, and Yeshua in the Greek, Jesus, which transliterates over into English as Jesus. Same name. As the angel instructed Joseph, she will give birth to a son, and you shall give to him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins, and that's what the name means. God saves. Our salvation is a gift from God, and this book, Joshua, is a preview of what it looks like. Even when we choose God and put on Christ in baptism, we still have a lot of struggle. Once they left Egypt, went through the Red Sea, they still had a lot of trouble. But the reward is great. Our eternal rest with God. That doesn't mean laying around taking a nap when we get to heaven. The kind of rest that God's rest is a time of refreshment and revitalization. So whatever it is we'll be doing in heaven, and Don Van Zant and I, we used to talk about this some. He was of the opinion that when we get there, God will have a job for all of us. And so we will have the rest. We'll have a resurrected body that will be revitalized and refreshed, able to do whatever it is, whatever job it is God has for us in eternity. The book of Joshua should be, according to my Joshua professor years ago, included in that first 5 books. It should be the first 6 books. We always refer to the first 5 as the Pentateuch, which simply means 5 books. He always said it should be the Hexateuch, because Joshua was part of the same story. We should refer to the 6 books. The story of Joshua begins during Moses' account of that initial rescue from Egypt, which wasn't easy. We know Pharaoh didn't want to let him go, and Satan doesn't want to let us go either. He doesn't want to let people go to serve God. After the rescue, once they crossed through the Red Sea, their journey was just beginning. Like when we come up out of our baptismal waters, our journey with Jesus is just beginning. I can tell you it's not going to be an easy journey. Everybody in this room already knows that. But it is a great journey. Lots of blessings along the way, but also lots of ups and downs. And when we make bad choices along the way, it can get even worse. Just like with the Israelites when they had their faith crisis. Numbers 13, when the spies came back, were spying out the land, that's when they should have crossed, that's when they should have went in. Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, Numbers 13, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack those people. They're stronger than we are. They spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land. He said, the land we explored devours those people living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak that came from the Nephilim. And if you remember the story, Anak's bed Anak's bed, I think, was 13 feet long and 9 feet wide. And so there were some giants there. There were some big old boys there. And so they chose to be scared and not go into the promised land. And so, God said, okay, you're going to wander around out here for 40 years because you made the wrong choice. And unfortunately, when bad things happen to us that we don't understand, sometimes we make bad choices. Sometimes we have a faith crisis. During those times when bad things happen that we find out how real our faith really is. As far as I'm concerned, just about every kind of trouble we face today seems like it's full of giants. Seems like sometimes those problems make us look like grasshoppers. But like Jesus told Jairus, whose little girl was deathly ill, Mark 5:36, don't be afraid, just believe. I can't find any place in the Bible where Joshua ever wavered. He was faithful to God's calling. And when we think about everything he saw, from Egypt into the promised land, he saw the people's lack of trust and loyalty to God. When he was up on that mountain with Moses, he didn't go all the way up, but he was part of the way up. When they made that golden calf, he saw the complaining against Moses and God. He saw their pity parties. We're hungry and we're thirsty. Back there in Egypt, we had pots of meat. No, they didn't. They had a lot of hard work. He watched it all. He led the fight against the Amalekites as the priest held up Moses' arms. Crossed the Red Sea, and he crossed the Jordan River. What a life this guy had, Joshua. He obviously took serious what God told him back in Joshua chapter 1. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave to you. Do not turn from it to the right or left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it night and day, that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you'll be prosperous and successful. Then I think about in chapter 5, where he had that surprise visit. He's getting ready to go into Jericho, and he looks up, and there is a scary-looking dude with a sword. Theophany. An appearance of God to him. Thinking that had to be pretty scary. And I love what Joshua asks. He says, are you for us or for our enemies? And I just love the answer. I'm not for either one of you. I'm for God. I come as the commander of the Lord, of the army of the Lord. Joshua fell face down and worshiped him. He says, well, what message do you have for me? And he says, take off your sandals, for you're on holy ground. And then he went on to give him the instructions of how to take Jericho. And to me, as probably most of you already know, the highlight of the whole book of Joshua is Joshua chapters 2 and 6. Where Joshua, Jesus, rescues a young woman who wanted to leave her life of illicit sex and idolatry to join God's people. Because God saved. And he went in and rescued Rahab and her family, and he continues to save people today. Let's read the text. I'm pretty old school when it comes to Bible classes. It's a Bible class, so we're going to read the Bible. The Bible's got a lot more to say than I do. I think almost every college course I ever took, which was more than I can count on the Bible, we always read the whole scripture in class. If you'll notice, that's why I didn't take the classes, the weeks that had 7 chapters in them to teach. Because I didn't even think I could get through all 7 chapters before we ran out of time. I cheated and I took the short chapters there. So there you go. A long time after the Lord had given Israel rest from all the enemies around them, Joshua was old, advanced in age. So Joshua summoned all Israel, including its elders, leaders, judges, and officers, and said to them, I am old, advanced in age, and you have seen for yourselves everything the Lord your God did to all these nations on your account, because it was the Lord your God who was fighting for you. See, I have allotted these remaining nations to you as an inheritance for your tribes, including all the nations I have destroyed, from the Jordan westward to the Mediterranean Sea. The Lord your God will force them back on your account and drive them out before you, so you can take possession of their land, as the Lord your God promised you. Be very strong and continue obeying all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, so that you do not turn from it to the right or left, and so that you do not associate with these nations remaining among you. Do not call on the names of their gods or make an oath to them. Do not serve them or bow and worship to them. Instead, be loyal to the Lord your God, as you have been to this day. The Lord has driven out great and powerful nations before you, and no one is able to stand against you to this day. One of you routed 1,000, because the Lord your God was fighting for you, as he promised. So diligently watch yourselves. Love the Lord your God. If you ever turn away and become loyal to the rest of these nations remaining among you, and if you intermarry or associate with them and they with you, know for certain that the Lord your God will not continue to drive these nations out before you. They will become a snare and a trap for you, a sharp stick for your sides, and thorns in your eyes, until you disappear from this good land the Lord your God has given you. I'm now going the way of the whole earth, and you know with all your heart and all your soul that none of the good promises the Lord your God made to you has failed. Everything was fulfilled for you. Not one promise has failed. Since every good thing the Lord your God promised you has come about, so he will bring on you every bad thing until he has annihilated you from this good land the Lord your God has given you. You break the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, go and serve other gods, and bow and worship to them, the Lord's anger will burn against you. You will quickly disappear from this good land he has given you. So the first 5 verses, Joshua is reminding them of what God has done and what he will do. To a crowd bigger than that at Yankee Stadium, when Lou Gehrig gave his address, Joshua begins his farewell address. You remember back to chapter 10, the writer of Joshua, which was most likely Joshua himself, he referred, as he was talking about that event where the sun and moon stood still, he referred back, I guess because it was just such a fantastic story. I don't know if people can believe this or not. So I'm going to refer to the book of Jasher, which tells the same story. So there was a book written before Joshua that told that same story. So that made me curious, so I had to buy a copy of that book. It's still around. It's never claimed to be inspired by God, but it's a good history book. Must be a good history book It's referred to 3 times in the Bible. In Joshua, in 2 Samuel 1:18, and in 2 Timothy 3:8. So it must be pretty accurate, or these guys wouldn't have referred to it. A good little history. And it covers the Hexateuch. That's all it covers. It covers from creation through Joshua. It's translated first into English in the mid-1800s. Gives us a little bit more detail about the timing of all of this. I'll read you a little excerpt from the book of Jasher, chapter 90. And by the way, some scholars don't think Jasher was a guy's name, because the word actually means upright. They think it actually refers to the book of the upright, whatever. Verse 32 of chapter 90. He tells us when this happened. It was in the 26th year after the children of Israel had passed the Jordan. So they've crossed 26 years later. That is the 66th year after the children of Israel had departed from Egypt. That Joshua was old, advanced in years, being 108 years old in those days. That gives us a little bit more detail of when it was, and it also tells us Joshua was 42 years old when he left Egypt. Because he's now 108 and it's 66 years. Larry can check my math. He used to be a math teacher. Verse 3. Joshua gives them a reminder of everything God did for them. Basically, he says, look, if it wasn't for the Lord, you would have never made it. You guys would have already been destroyed because it was God out there fighting those battles for you. But he says in verse 4 and 5, the Israelites still hadn't driven out all the evil people, still hadn't occupied all of the area that God had given to them. God gave them a rest. He gave them a little period of rest, revitalization, rejuvenation. But it looks like they've kind of become complacent. Pretty nice here where we're at. So maybe we'll just keep resting, happy with what they had. But Joshua is reminding them here, just because I'm about to die, when I'm gone, that doesn't end your responsibility to occupy the rest of the land. The next few verses is a challenge. Challenge to stay faithful. Joshua, verses 6 through 8, gives them the same warning and advice that God had given them a few years back. The challenge, really, be very strong. Be careful to obey all that is written in the book of the law of Moses without turning aside to the right or left. Do not associate with those nations that remain among you. Do not invoke the names of their gods or swear by them. You must not serve them or bow down to them. But you're to hold fast to the Lord your God as you have until now. Pretty strong reminder to keep on doing what God's commanded. The book of the law of Moses, it seems to, according to a very good commentary that I have, and this guy, he's pretty sharp, Hess. He believes that this book of the law of the Moses refers to the specific instructions that God gave Moses on one of his trips up the mountain, specifically the one in Exodus 24, where it says, Then the Lord said to Moses, Come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel. You're to worship at a distance, but Moses alone is to approach the Lord. The others must not come near, and the people may not come up with him. And then verse 4 of Exodus 24, Moses then wrote down everything the Lord had said. And then verse 7 of Exodus 24, then he took the book of the covenant and read it to the people, and they responded, We will do everything the Lord has said. We will obey. Another reminder from Joshua in verse 9 of chapter 23, the Lord has driven out great and powerful nations. The Lord has driven out great and powerful nations before you. Sit down someday and try to trace how God has got you where you are today and see what all He's driven out before you in your journey. From first learning about Jesus, I know James with you, it's from age 0. Me too. My mother took me from the day I came home from the hospital. Sit down and try to retrace how God has got you where you are today. Everything you've been through. Especially the dumb and stupid things. It's amazing to me, really, because I did some pretty dumb and stupid things. Especially when I was a teenager. And then some of the jobs I had along the years that I certainly can't take credit for, because God provided open doors, and it just seems like He put me where He wanted me. And it had to be the Holy Spirit that either, I don't think the Holy Spirit guided me. I think He drugged me through the door. Or He stood behind me and pushed me through the door. Not sure I was smart enough or faithful enough in some of those days to have followed His leadership. Pretty sure He gave me a shut. So if I trace down all the little twists and turns, I don't think I could write them all down in a week, because I just keep thinking of new ones. But when God is with you, if you want Him to guide you, He will. He always will. And so that's what Joshua was telling these people. God's got you where you are today. You didn't do it on your own. You couldn't have done it on your own. Of all the armies they fought and all the cities they overthrew, they couldn't have done it on their own. They weren't equipped for it. But God saw them through it. He reminds them that again in verse 10. Everything you accomplished is because God was fighting for you. And then another challenge, one in verse 11. I like the way the translation that I used today. That's why I read out of this particular translation today. The Holman Christian Standard says, so diligently watch yourselves. Diligently watch yourselves. Love the Lord your God. Got exclamation point behind both of those. Diligently watch yourselves, exclamation. Love the Lord your God, exclamation. Revised Standard says, take good heed to yourselves, therefore to love the Lord your God. King James says it about the same way. The NIV and the ESV says, be very careful. Be very careful, watch yourselves and love the Lord. Not something to be taken lightly. This business of loving God, I mean, no wonder Jesus listed that as the number one command. And then He added on top of that, you got to put everything into it. Mark 12. The most important one Jesus answered is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. In other words, everything you've got, put into it. The second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There's no commandment greater than these. So this kind of love He's talking about, where He says, love the Lord your God, and make sure you do it, and watch yourselves diligently to make sure you do it. This kind of love is the love that is totally committed to God with everything you got. And then on top of that, you got to be like Jesus and look out for other people. The last few verses, verses 12 through 16, are warnings. Warnings about being unfaithful. You know, God works out His plan in spite of man. In spite of whatever man does, man cannot derail God's plan. It's going to keep going. He'll find somebody in some way to work around whatever man messes up. You see, God knew what was going to happen way down the road. He knew they wouldn't remain faithful in the long run, but he never forced his will on them. God gives us the opportunity to choose him. And he gives us the opportunity to not choose him also. He keeps all of his promises. And he promised this, verses 12 and 13. For if you turn away and cling to the rest of these nations remaining among you, and if you intermarry or associate with them and they with you, know for certain that the Lord your God will not continue to drive these nations out before you. They will become a snare and a trap, a scourge for your sides and thorns in your eyes, till you disappear from this good land the Lord has given you. Man, that's a scary warning right there. Guess what? That's exactly what happened down the road. That's what happens when we abandon Jesus. When we give up Jesus for a life of self-pleasure instead of loving him and our neighbors. Paul gave the same advice to the Corinthians, 2 Corinthians 6, beginning of verse 14. Do not be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what do fellowship and light have with or what fellowship can light have with darkness? And what harmony is there between Christ and Belial? Or what does a believer have in common with an unbeliever? Doesn't mean we can't have friends who aren't believers, but it sure means we shouldn't be letting them influence us. We should be influencing them. This whole story here reminds me of Rebecca. Remember Rebecca? This goes way back before the Egyptian slavery days. When old Esau took Canaanite wives, 2 of them. There's just something about those Canaanite women. I don't know what it was, but these Jewish guys were attracted to them. And apparently they were pretty evil. He took Canaanite wives. Wrong move. Upset his mama. It upset his mama. You don't want to do that. Those women made Rebecca sick. I love this verse. Genesis 27, beginning at verse 46. And Rebecca said to Isaac, I am disgusted with living because of these Hittite women. If Jacob takes a wife from among the women of this land, from Hittite women like these, my life will not be worth living. I mean, these daughter-in-laws of hers must have been something. Woo! Man, they were disgusting. You know, I can relate to that because being brought up a Baptist, I mean, I love my mother, but I mean, when I told her I was married a Church of Christ girl, dude, I upset my mama. You know that woman wouldn't talk to me for 6 months. And I lived in the same house with her. Going to Oklahoma Christian. There I was, off for the summer and stuff. And I'd go home, you know, after on Sundays and go to church with her and eat her good roast beef dinner and stuff. And, you know, she wouldn't even talk to me about it. I'd sit there at the dinner table 3 feet from her. She'd look at my dad. See if he wants some more mashed potatoes. Woo! Don't be upsetting your mama. Don't be marrying no Canaanite women now. Don't do it. Well, it just reminded me of it because, I mean, God was so disgusted with these Canaanites, he wanted all of them killed. You gotta get rid of all of them. Don't be intermarrying with them, don't be associated with them, don't be serving their God. Israelites were supposed to drive them all out, but they didn't do it. By the way, marrying a Church of Christ girl wasn't as bad as marrying a Hittite girl. I think it worked out pretty good. I think I found a closer way to follow Jesus, and we've been together for 50 years, so must have been all right. Must have been.
Glad you clarified that.
Yeah, thank you. I had to because I could see a glare coming from the back of the room. It's like, I might not get lunch today.
Maybe silent.
Yeah. So anyway, verse 15 and 16 kind of drives it home. Obviously, Joshua saw the possibility of the Israelites losing their land. So in this farewell address to the leaders and to the Israelites, he says, look, every good thing God has promised you has come true, but you better believe the bad promises will come true also if you break the covenant. And I got to tell you what, nobody's seen bad like the bad God promised them. All you got to do is go back there and read Deuteronomy 28. It's scary. It's scary. Paul referred to it in Galatians 3:13, where he says, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law. The curse of the law is what's spelled out in Deuteronomy 28. So we need to be thankful for grace. Not one of us can live without goofing up. And no matter how hard we try, we just can't make it on our own. So we need to thank God every day for having Jesus as the plan to rescue us. Paul spelled it out in Ephesians 2, beginning at verse 1, as for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins. In other words, you're just a bunch of walking dead people. You were dead in your transgressions and sins in which you used to live when you followed the ways of the world and the ruler of the kingdom of the air, and the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. All of us also lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our flesh, following its desires and thoughts. Like the rest, we were by nature deserving of wrath, but because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in our transgressions. By grace, you've been saved. God raised us up with Christ and seated us with him in the heavenly realms in Christ Jesus. Well, Joshua 23 places a great deal of responsibility on God's people. But they had the resources in place to stay faithful if they would only use them. They had all their past experiences, which Joshua reminded them of. They knew their history. They knew where they came from. They had faithful elders, priests, and judges. They had the book of the law of Moses. They were witnesses to many of God's miracles. And we have our own set of resources today. Because we got the whole written word. We got a strong church family. We've got good leaders, elders, ministers, people we can call on. I think Joshua 23 can be very useful to us if we examine our own lives and our own journey with Christ. We need to take time and meditate on that journey. It's good to think about how we got where we are today. It's good to think about how we learned about Jesus. It's good to think about our mistakes when we messed up and how God saw us through. It's good to think about prayers that we know were answered. Good to think about how God shaped us and good to think about anytime our health has been spared and restored because God wasn't through with us yet. All kinds of questions and thoughts about God, it's good just to think about. Thinking about all the twists and turns and comparing those to these examples of how God called Abraham and all through his descendants and how he worked through them and finally got them into the land of Canaan. How at first they got there, they got to the land of Canaan, and then they ended up down in Egypt because of the drought. They were welcome there. Then he got a new Pharaoh, a new leader. He didn't know them, he didn't care about them. They became slaves. And then how God came and rescued them, got them out of that trouble. God always keeps his promises. He's promised us eternal life. It's good to reflect on our own journey. So as verse 11 says, so that we can watch ourselves diligently in following the command to love the Lord. I'm going to close. I'm trying to be as good as Kevin. He let us out early. I'm going to try to let something. Yes.
Before you quit, could I add to your comments about farewell speeches? I like what you said.
Oh, yeah.
One of my favorites was done by Douglas MacArthur after he was fired as the leader of the Korean campaign. He was invited to West Point to speak to the cadets. I can't quote exactly what he said, but it was roughly, I need to tell you that due to advancing age and failing health, this time I shall not return.
There you go. That was one of the ones I ran across when I was looking at farewell speeches. Yes, thank you. So I'm going to close with a line from a prayer that's still recited today by faithful Jews as they celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. It says this: Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, for keeping us alive, taking care of us, and bringing us to this time. We're dismissed.